What would you do if your own daughter-in-law walked into your kitchen and demanded your entire paycheck, right to your face? I stayed calm, but that night, when she and my son came for their usual free dinner, they walked into a house so empty their screams echoed down the street. Want to know what happened next? Trust me, you won't see this twist coming. It started on a Tuesday, which, as we all know, is the most boring day of the week. There's nothing special about Tuesdays. Mondays have their drama. Wednesdays are for hope. Thursdays are for anticipation. And Fridays, well, we all know Fridays are for fun. But Tuesdays? They're just there, like the parsley on the side of your plate. Present, but not particularly exciting. So, there I was, minding my own business, sitting at the kitchen table with my trusty scissors, clipping coupons from the Sunday paper I'd finally gotten around to reading. I had Fleetwood Mac playing softly in the background, because, let's be honest, nothing soothes the soul like Stevie Nicks on a slow afternoon. The house was quiet, the coffee was hot, and for a moment I felt like I had finally mastered the art of peaceful living. That's when the front door swung open with a bang that nearly sent me and my coffee flying. In walked Amanda, my daughter-in-law, with all the subtlety of a marching band. She didn't even knock. I swear, sometimes I wonder if they teach that in daughter-in-law school. Lesson 1. Always enter unannounced. She breezed past the coat rack, didn't bother to take off her shoes, and plopped herself right down at my kitchen table, scattering my carefully sorted coupons like confetti at a parade. I looked up, startled, and tried to mask my irritation with a polite smile. After all, I was raised to be gracious, even when my blood pressure was rising. Amanda is one of those women who always looks like she's on her way to a photo shoot, hair perfectly styled, nails done, not a wrinkle in sight. She's got that air about her, the kind that says, I know what I want, and I'm not afraid to take it. Normally, I admire that in a woman. But today, I had a feeling I was about to be on the receiving end of it, and let me tell you, I was not in the mood. She didn't waste any time with pleasantries. No, hi, Mom, how are you? Or is that coffee fresh? She just fixed me with those big brown eyes that could melt butter or freeze it, depending on her mood, and said, From now on, your paycheck goes into my account. You don't need it anyway, I blinked. For a second, I thought I'd misheard her. Maybe she was joking. Maybe this was some new TikTok prank I hadn't heard about yet. But no, she was dead serious. She sat there, arms crossed, lips pursed, waiting for my response like she'd just asked me to pass the salt. I felt my jaw drop, and I had to remind myself to close my mouth before a fly wandered in. Excuse me? Did I just get demoted from mother-in-law to ATM? I took a slow, deep breath, the kind you take when you're trying not to say something you'll regret. I looked at her, really looked at her, and for a moment I saw the little girl she must have been once, eager, determined, maybe a little scared. But then I remembered who I was. I am not some pushover. I am a woman who survived the 80s, who raised 2 kids on a shoestring budget, who learned to stretch a dollar until it screamed. I'm not about to let anyone, least of all my daughter-in-law, tell me what to do with my hard-earned money. But I didn't say any of that. Instead, I nodded calmly, as if she'd just asked me to pick up milk on my way home. All right, Amanda, I said, my voice as steady as I could make it. If that's what you think is best. Inside, though, I was already plotting. Because if there's one thing I've learned in my 58 years on this earth, it's that you don't let anyone, family or not, walk all over you. Especially not in your own kitchen. Amanda seemed satisfied with my answer. She stood up, smoothed her skirt, and gave me a little smile, like she'd just won a prize at the fair. Good. I'll text you my account details, she said. And with that, she was gone. Out the door as quickly as she'd come, leaving a trail of expensive perfume and chaos in her wake. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the empty doorway. My coffee had gone cold, my coupons were a mess, and my peaceful Tuesday had been shattered. But as I gathered up the scattered bits of paper, I felt something else stirring inside me, something fierce and determined. I thought about all the times I'd put everyone else first, all the times I'd bitten my tongue for the sake of family harmony. Not this time. This time, I was going to stand up for myself. I was going to remind Amanda, and maybe even my own son, Brian, who I was. Because here's the thing. Kindness is not weakness. And just because I'm generous doesn't mean I'm a doormat. I may be a mother-in-law, but I'm also a woman with a backbone and a few tricks up my sleeve. And as I sat there, humming along to Go Your Own Way, I knew one thing for sure. Amanda was about to learn a lesson she'd never forget. That night, as the sun dipped behind the neighbor's maple tree and painted the kitchen in a soft golden glow, I found myself standing at the stove, stirring my famous lasagna sauce. The aroma of garlic and basil filled the air, and for a moment it almost felt like any other Wednesday night. But tonight there was a tension simmering beneath the surface, thicker than my homemade bechamel. Amanda and my son, Brian, were due any minute for their weekly dinner, a tradition that started as a way to keep the family close, but lately had begun to feel more like a standing appointment at a free restaurant. I glanced at the clock, then at the table I'd just finished setting, and couldn't help but wonder, when did my kindness become a weakness? And more importantly, when did my house become a drive-thru? I tried to shake off the feeling as I sprinkled a little extra cheese on top of the lasagna. After all, I loved cooking for my family. It was one of the ways I showed love, the way my own mother had before me. But tonight, every clink of the silverware seemed to echo Amanda's words from earlier. From now on, your paycheck goes into my account. You don't need it anyway. The audacity. I'd spent the afternoon replaying that conversation in my head, each time coming up with a wittier comeback I wished I'd said. Isn't that always the way? The best lines come to you when you're elbow deep in dishwater, not when you actually need them. The doorbell rang, snapping me out of my thoughts. I wiped my hands on my apron and pasted on my best hostess with the mostest smile. Brian and Amanda breezed in, all smiles and laughter, as if nothing unusual had happened that day. Brian gave me a quick hug. He always was my sweet boy, even if he was a little clueless sometimes. And Amanda handed me a bottle of wine, the cheap kind she always picked up at the gas station. For you, Mom, she said, as if she were bestowing a great honor. I thanked her, set the bottle on the counter, and tried not to roll my eyes. We sat down to dinner, and as usual, the conversation was light and breezy. Amanda chatted about her new yoga class. Brian talked about work, and I nodded along, serving up generous portions of lasagna. But underneath it all, I could feel the shift. Amanda's eyes kept darting to her phone, probably waiting for a notification that my paycheck had landed in her account. Brian, bless his heart, seemed oblivious to the undercurrent, happily shoveling food into his mouth and complimenting my cooking. Mom, this is the best lasagna you've ever made, he said for the 100th time. I smiled, but inside, I was stewing. As I refilled their glasses and cleared their plates, I found myself thinking back over the years. I remembered the first time I made lasagna for Brian, when he was just a little boy with a mop of curly hair and a smile that could light up a room. I remembered the family dinners, the laughter, the stories shared around this very table. When had things changed? When had my generosity turned into expectation? I glanced at Amanda, who was now scrolling through her phone, and felt a pang of sadness. Had I done this? Had I made it too easy for them to take me for granted? But then, as I loaded the dishwasher, a new feeling crept in. Resolve. If you can't teach your kids boundaries, who will? Dr. Phil? Oprah? I don't think so. This was my family, my home, and it was time I reminded them of that. I decided, right then and there, that tonight would be the last time they took my kindness for granted. I was done being the family doormat. It was time for a little lesson. After dinner, Amanda and Brian settled onto the couch, already making plans for next week's meal. Maybe you could make your pot roast, Mom? Brian suggested, his eyes hopeful. Amanda chimed in. And those garlic rolls. Oh, and don't forget dessert. I smiled sweetly, but inside I was already plotting. I'd spent years making sure everyone else was comfortable, happy, and well-fed. Now it was time to take care of myself for a change. As they left, Amanda gave me a quick hug, her perfume lingering in the air long after she was gone. Don't forget to send your paycheck details, okay? She whispered, as if she were sharing a secret. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course, dear, I replied, my voice calm and steady. But as I closed the door behind them, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I knew what I had to do. That night, as I sat in my favorite chair with a cup of tea, I thought about the lesson I was about to teach. It wouldn't be loud or dramatic, no shouting matches or slammed doors. No, this would be a quiet storm, the kind that changes everything without anyone realizing it until it's too late. I smiled to myself, feeling a spark of excitement I hadn't felt in years. Maybe it was time to remind everyone, myself included, that kindness is a choice, not an obligation. And sometimes, the best way to love your family is to teach them how to stand on their own 2 feet. As I turned off the lights and headed to bed, I felt a sense of peace settle over me. Tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, the lesson would begin. And I couldn't help but wonder, would they even see it coming? So here's where it gets juicy. You know that feeling you get when you're about to do something a little bit naughty, but you know it's for all the right reasons? That was me, all day Thursday. I woke up with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in years. I made myself a strong cup of coffee, put on my favorite lipstick, Revlon's Cherries in the Snow, because if you're going to make a statement, you might as well look good doing it, and set my plan in motion. I called my friend and neighbor, Linda, who's always up for a little mischief, and together we spent the morning moving my most precious things out of the house. The photo albums, my mother's china, the Afghan I'd crocheted during the blizzard of '93, anything that mattered to me was carefully packed and carried next door. Linda's husband Bob even helped us move the recliner. "You sure about this?" he asked, grinning as he wiped sweat from his brow. "Bob," I said, "sometimes you have to shake the tree to see what falls out." He laughed and gave me a thumbs up. By noon, the house was as empty as a politician's promise. The only thing left was a single note on the kitchen counter, written in my neatest cursive. "If you want dinner, you'll have to cook it yourselves. And as for my paycheck, I think I'll keep it. Thank you very much." I placed it right where Amanda would see it, next to the spot where she usually dropped her purse. Then, with a final glance around, I locked the door and headed over to Linda's, feeling a mix of nerves and excitement. I'll admit, there was a tiny part of me that wondered if I was going too far. But then I remembered Amanda's smug little smile, and the way Brian had just gone along with it all, and I knew I was doing the right thing. Sometimes, the only way to get through to people is to let them experience a little discomfort. Linda poured us each a generous glass of wine, and we settled in by her front window, which had a perfect view of my front porch. "You think they'll freak out?" she asked, her eyes twinkling. "Oh, I'm counting on it," I replied, taking a sip and feeling the tension start to melt away. We didn't have to wait long. Right on schedule, Brian's car pulled up, and out they came. Amanda in her high heels, Brian carrying a bag of groceries, probably expecting me to cook them, bless his heart. They were laughing about something, completely oblivious to the storm about to hit. They walked up to the door, still chatting, and I could see Amanda fumbling with her phone, probably texting one of her friends about how easy it was to get what she wanted. The door opened and they stepped inside. For a moment, there was silence. Then suddenly, their screams echoed through the empty house, bouncing off the bare walls and out into the quiet evening. Linda nearly spit out her wine, and I had to clap a hand over my mouth to keep from laughing out loud. Where is everything?" I heard Amanda shriek, her voice rising in pitch. "Brian, where's your mother? Where's the food? Where's the furniture?" Brian's voice was muffled, but I could tell he was just as confused. Mom, are you here?" he called, his footsteps echoing as he moved from room to room. I watched as they darted from the living room to the kitchen, their faces growing more bewildered by the second. Amanda finally spotted the note and snatched it up, reading it aloud with a mixture of disbelief and outrage. "If you want dinner, you'll have to cook it yourselves. And as for my paycheck, I think I'll keep it. Thank you very much." She crumpled the note in her fist and let out a frustrated groan. "She can't do this. She can't just leave." Brian, ever the peacemaker, tried to calm her down. "Maybe she just went out for a bit. Maybe she's at Linda's." Amanda shot him a look that could curdle milk. "Well, she better come back soon. I'm starving." Linda and I exchanged a glance, both of us trying not to burst out laughing. "You know," Linda whispered, "I think you just made history. I've never seen Amanda speechless before." I grinned, feeling a sense of satisfaction I hadn't felt in ages. Who says you can't teach an old dog new tricks? I took another sip of wine and leaned back in my chair, watching as Amanda and Brian wandered around the empty house, completely at a loss. For once, they were the ones left scrambling, and I was the one in control. As the sun set and the sky turned a deep shade of purple, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I'd spent so many years putting everyone else first, always making sure my family was comfortable and cared for. But tonight I'd finally stood up for myself. I'd reminded them, and maybe even myself, that I was more than just a cook, a maid, or a walking checkbook. I was a woman with a backbone, a sense of humor, and a few tricks up her sleeve. Eventually, Brian and Amanda gave up and left, their faces a mix of confusion and frustration. I watched them drive away, then turned to Linda and raised my glass. "To new beginnings," I said, and she clinked her glass against mine. As I sat there, surrounded by friends and laughter, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sometimes, the best lessons are the ones that come with a little shock and a lot of love. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my phone buzzing on the nightstand. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. After all, I was enjoying the rare luxury of sleeping in at Linda's, wrapped in her guest room's soft quilt, with no one expecting me to cook breakfast or solve the world's problems before 9 a.m. But curiosity got the better of me, and I reached for the phone, squinting at the screen. It was Amanda, of course. I could tell by the string of missed calls and frantic texts that she'd been up half the night, probably pacing my empty living room and wondering where her next meal and her next payday was coming from. I let it ring a few more times, just to let her stew, before finally answering with my sweetest, most innocent, "Hello?" Amanda's voice was trembling, a far cry from the confident, demanding tone she'd used just days before. "Where did you go? We thought something happened. The house is empty, and you didn't answer your phone, and Brian is worried sick." I could almost picture her, hair slightly out of place, pacing in her designer heels, clutching her phone like a lifeline. For a split second, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "Oh, nothing happened, dear," I replied, keeping my voice light and breezy. "I just realized I don't need to feed people who don't respect me. And as for my paycheck, I think I'll spend it on a cruise. Maybe I'll even find a new hobby, like fencing, or skydiving, or just enjoying my own company." I let the words hang in the air, savoring the silence on the other end. It was the kind of silence that only comes when someone realizes they've pushed too far and the ground beneath them has suddenly disappeared. Amanda sputtered, trying to regain her composure. But you can't just leave. What about dinner? What about Brian? What about us?" I almost laughed. It was funny, really, how quickly people remember your value when you stop giving them everything for free. I thought about all the years I'd spent making sure everyone else was comfortable, always putting my own needs last. I thought about the countless dinners, the birthday cakes, the late-night phone calls, the quiet sacrifices that no one ever seemed to notice. And I realized in that moment that I was done being taken for granted. "Amanda," I said gently, "I love you both, but I'm not your maid, your cook, or your personal banker. I'm your family. And family means respect, not entitlement. If you want to come over for dinner, you're welcome. But you'll need to bring something to the table, too. And as for my paycheck, well, I think I've earned the right to spend it on myself for a change." I could hear her breathing on the other end, the wheels turning as she tried to process this new reality. I understand," she finally whispered, her voice small. "I'm sorry." After I hung up, I felt a strange mix of relief and pride. It wasn't easy, standing up for myself after all these years. But as I looked around Linda's cozy kitchen, sipping the coffee she'd brewed just for me, I realized how good it felt to finally put myself first. Linda, ever the cheerleader, gave me a wink over her mug. "You did the right thing, you know. Sometimes people need a little wake-up call." I nodded, feeling lighter than I had in years. Later that day, Brian called. His voice was softer than usual, tinged with worry and a hint of embarrassment. "Mom, I'm sorry about everything. I didn't realize how much we were taking you for granted. Amanda and I talked and, well, we want to do better. Can we come over and help you unpack? Maybe make dinner together?" My heart swelled a little. That was all I'd ever wanted. Not just to be needed, but to be appreciated. "Of course, sweetheart," I said, smiling. "But you're on dish duty." That evening, The three of us gathered in my now slightly emptier house, laughing as we unpacked boxes and tried to remember where everything went. Amanda even rolled up her sleeves and helped chop vegetables, and Brian, bless him, managed not to burn the garlic bread. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were a team, not just a one-woman show. As we sat down to eat, I looked around the table and felt a deep sense of peace. I'd spent so many years worrying about everyone else, afraid that if I stopped giving, I'd lose their love. But the truth was, love isn't about what you can do for someone. It's about respect, understanding, and sometimes a little tough love. I raised my glass and made a toast to new beginnings and to remembering that we're all in this together. After dinner, as Amanda and Brian washed the dishes without being asked, I might add, I sat back and let myself dream a little. Maybe I really would take that cruise. Maybe I'd sign up for a painting class or finally learn how to salsa dance. The world suddenly felt wide open, full of possibilities I'd forgotten I had. Funny how a little payback and a lot of self-respect can change everything. And as I watched my family working together, laughing and learning, I knew I'd done the right thing. Sometimes the best way to teach others to value you is to start valuing yourself. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe for more real-life tales, laughter and a little wisdom from someone who's been there, done that, and bought the t-shirt. Because we're not just mothers-in-law, we're legends.